I mained the HSK Pro for about 16 weeks, and today I want to share with you my final thoughts from the perspective of someone that really used it. I'll start by discussing the community feedback I received from my recent YouTube community post. Hopefully this will be seen by G-Wolves and acted on for the next revision. We'll see about that. Thank you all for your input here. So let's start with shape. And it's difficult for me to comment on the shape or offer improvement ideas for this aspect of the design because shape feels somewhat subjective, but I do like the current shape of the HSK Pro for the reasons that I'll cover later in the video. That said, I wonder if a wider shell may make it more comfortable and more appealing to a wider audience. I'd also like to try a HSK with a bit more shape on both sides, like the middle section of the HTX, with a curve for your thumb to sit in and a place for your fingers to press against or rest on. The clicks and scroll wheel have significant room for improvement, in my opinion, and I'd like to see a much lighter, more dialed in experience in the next revision of the mouse. My thoughts are that the lighter the mouse is, the lighter and more dialed in the buttons on the mouse should be to help accommodate that overall weight. You don't want unnecessarily heavy inputs dragging you out of that immersion you feel in-game while playing. The power on-off switch is a pain to use. I'd like a more traditional button on the bottom of the mouse. I shouldn't need a tool to switch the unit on or off. The software doesn't really make sense either, and while it is functional, it is quite amateur. I'd like a more intuitive interface and a more reliable battery charge indicator. And while this one goes without saying, all ports on the product should be USB-C, and having one of my mice use a micro USB cable is a real pain in my... No more needs to be said about that. Finally, they need to do something about their approach to automation and customer services. Their reputation precedes them at this point, and I think some focused attention in these areas would serve them very well for the future. I now want to talk about how the experience with the HSK Pro differs between cloth and hard mouse pads. So many of the less positive points I'm discussing today are only really issues I experience with the HSK when I play on a speed glass pad like the SkyPad 3.0 or the Razer Atlas. And I find that when I play on a higher friction pad like a cloth pad or maybe the Serapad Kin, these issues are much less significant because of the increased friction provided. So please remember that as we go through the rest of this video. The TLDR here is I feel this mouse is better suited to a cloth mouse pad than a fast glass pad. Let's talk a bit about the shape. So the shape of the mouse puts my fingers in a somewhat relaxed and natural position when compared to the position of my fingers on bigger mice. And I feel this is a big contributor to the aiming with my fingers feeling. I don't have to think about how to hold the mouse, it just kind of fits in my hand. And that said, the mouse is very small in terms of width, height and length, and I have heard from a lot of you that have struggled to find a comfortable grip with the HSK Pro. This also means that there isn't an abundance of stability, and you're really reliant on your mouse control to perform well with it. This can act as an aim trainer in itself, helping you to develop your mouse control if this is an area you are lacking in and actively trying to develop. If you're concerned about your comfort with the HSK Pro, I've put a video in the description which may be helpful for you as I discuss my experience with many different fingertip grip mouse options. Some of those mice offer less range of motion than the HSK, but most of them are much wider and longer and therefore offer a lot more stability and feedback from the playing surface you use. Those mice will typically be a safer shape too, and the HSK Pro is somewhat polarizing in that aspect of its design. My longer term thoughts on the HSK Pro as an endgame fingertip mouse is that it could be your endgame, but a bigger mouse regarded as good for fingertip more generally could offer you a more balanced experience. So if I've held your interest for this long, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And if you have any questions about the HSK Pro or anything else, just drop them down below, I'd love to see you down there. With reference to the mouse 1 and 2 button implementation, I've observed how the light weight of the mouse, the low friction of my mouse pad, and my aggressive under pressure panic clicking could sometimes throw my aim off, and the act of clicking when I panic sometimes moves my cursor off the target. I do not experience this with other mice, and this issue is specific to a glass speed pad playing surface, so the cloth pad users won't need to worry about this one. A lighter click implementation in the next revision, I feel, is required. In terms of my experience with the mouse and how I have performed with it, I can get more range of motion in my fingertip grip with the HSK Pro than any other mouse. And I think this is its unique selling point. It's ultra light and provides you with ultra range of motion. If you ever feel limited by your range of motion when using your current mouse, the HSK Pro is the mouse that will make that feeling go away. And I simply can't make it hit my palm. But I acknowledge there are downsides with having a mouse with such a small footprint too. And the HSK Pro is tiny, and therefore the requirement for good mouse control is increased. And when I've played with the Pulsar X2 Mini or the G-Wolves HTX Ace, which both have a much wider base, it feels like I'm playing with stabilizers on in comparison to aiming with the HSK Pro. The control and stability you get with a wider base is very noticeable, and the HSK doesn't have a wide base. Using this mouse feels like your fingertip grip is exaggerated. It takes all of the fingertip aim qualities to the extreme, but when I fingertip grip of a slightly larger mice with a lesser range of motion, I don't feel like I'm missing too much maneuverability because I rarely use the full range of motion possible with the HSK Pro. And I felt like this was also worth mentioning because, as I mentioned before, the ultra range of motion possible with the HSK Pro is its unique selling point. The HSK Pro is also the closest thing you'll get to raw aim input on an affordable mouse at this point in time. And I guess what I mean is it won't protect you from bad inputs by giving you more stability or weight to heft around. One of the reasons I moved on from the HSK Pro is because of how, over time, my aim became quite inconsistent. While I experienced really high highs with the HSK Pro in terms of aim training scores, my moment-to-moment gameplay wasn't as impressive. Some days I felt unstoppable, other days I felt like dog water. I think a larger, maybe heavier mouse can result in a smoother and more consistent aiming experience if you are still developing your mouse control. And I don't mean the extremes of larger and heavier, I just mean slightly larger, slightly heavier to offset some of that stability loss and improve your consistency. I accept that this is a skill issue on my part, and I say that because I know some of you are probably typing that as I talk in the comment section down below. We're not all cracked out of our minds, let's just remember that. So in terms of how I perform in certain scenarios with this mouse, when I am performing well with it, I would rate the tracking ability for high mobility games as S tier. The speed you can adjust your aim and the effortless way the cursor just goes where you are looking is incredible. But this doesn't read across quite so well for clicking scenarios, and I'd put the HSK Pro in B or C tier for these scenarios. There's a big difference there, and I put that down to a symptom of the stability loss, or maybe the clicks being too heavy is unhelpful for those clicking scenarios. I also think you have to be more aware of the mouse's position on the vertical axis because it is so small, which isn't always a consideration with other mice. Maybe this is also throwing off my aim slightly in those clutch moments. The HSK Pro is the mouse I enjoy playing with the most when I'm playing well. It's a really fun product to use, and sometimes I just can't resist getting it out. But it requires the most skill to use of any mouse in my collection. I'd therefore suggest if you're seeking a mouse that can act as a tool to help develop your fingertip aiming, or maybe you're already a talented aimer seeking a light and fast experience, this mouse could be perfect for you. But if you're still getting to grips with your aiming and you're maybe less serious about getting better, and some people do just boot up FPS games to have a good time with their friends, it may be wise to seek a more forgiving product. This mouse is unique in terms of the experience it offers though. It makes me feel very connected to my character's control. To rehash my previous claims, this mouse feels like you're aiming with your fingertips, and to steal a description from a viewer, it feels like you're controlling your cursor with a gesture rather than by manipulating an object. For this reason, despite the infrequent inaccuracy when panicking under pressure, I'd say this is the most immersed I have felt in-game while aiming. So am I still maining the HSK Pro? It is in my main 3 rotation, but I am no longer a ride or die HSK Pro user. I am currently maining the G-Wolves HTX Ace, which I plan to review next, so stick around for that if you're interested. It's a really good alternative to the HSK Pro. Do I still recommend the HSK Pro? And yes, of course I do. I've loved playing with this mouse. I've loved using it. It's been very fun for me, as I've said before. but ultimately these videos are here to give you as much information as possible to help inform your purchase decision. And you can use code LogPile on the G-Wolves website if you decide to pull the trigger at checkout. This mouse also almost ruined me, so let's talk about that too. While using the HSK Pro, I noticed I could manage much higher sensitivities because of the way I could make aim adjustments so effortlessly. So I went from a 42cm to a 28cm sensitivity. However, over time, I noticed this higher sensitivity taking a toll on my wrists. I saw a steady increase in discomfort over the course of about 8 weeks. I didn't really know what was happening. I had a sore feeling in my forearm, but it didn't feel like muscle soreness. The inside of my arm felt weak. So I put this down to some form of tendon strain, and luckily I was able to pinpoint my recent change to high sense as the only recent change in lifestyle that could have caused this. And what an exciting life I lead. Pain in my arm disappeared in a few days. I think this was due to me not being conditioned to so much wrist and fingertip motion, which as a male in his 30s is truly surprising. And I suggest your experience will almost certainly differ to mine. I mention this though because I had ignored those symptoms, and I expect I would have picked up some enduring injuries if I had not acted proactively. So please be careful when you're messing around with your sensitivity. There's one more point to make before I leave you to the rest of your day. The first time I spoke about the HSK Pro, I mentioned the poor battery performance. And I suspect the battery performance I mentioned in my earliest review was due to the unit itself being faulty. With my new unit, I'm now gaming on 1K polling rate for 4 or more days before I need to recharge it with a 150 mAh battery, which I think is actually quite good. I do treat this mouse as a bit of a weekend sports car kind of mouse. I only use it when I'm gaming. I don't use it to browse the internet, etc., because I do have other mice with much bigger batteries for that purpose. So bear that in mind as well. So that's it. That's my last take on the HSK Pro. Good luck and Godspeed. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye now.